I've been using Litepanels 1x1 LED lights for the past few years, and I've found them indispensable for the type of work I do. The quality of their light is truly amazing, especially considering their small size and weight. There are actually 3 different Litepanels 1x1 kits to choose from, each with a different combination of lights. The 1x1 LS Traveler Duo kit contains 2 lights, 1 daylight balance spot and 1 daylight flood. The 1x1 LS Traveler Trio kit contains 3 lights, 1 daylight balance spot and 2 daylight floods. And the 1x1 LS Traveler Trio Plus kit also contains 3 lights, but they're different models. There's 1 daylight flood and 2 bicolor floods. Naturally, each kit also includes light stands and AC power supplies for each light in the kit. 1x1s can also be powered from a wide variety of professional camera batteries with the addition of an optional accessory plate, such as this one that's designed to accept Anton Bauer batteries. And there's another model that's made for Sony-style V-mount batteries. A battery like this one will allow a 1x1 to run for about 2 hours at full power, and if the light is dimmed down, it might be able to run all day. And speaking of dimming the lights down, all of the 1x1s, regardless of the model, have a convenient dimmer knob on the rear. The bicolor lights have a second knob for choosing the desired color temperature, from tungsten to daylight or anything in between. Having bicolor capability can really come in handy sometimes. For example, if you're shooting at a location that has a lot of existing incandescent lighting, you'll be able to precisely match your lights to the prevailing color temperature simply by turning a dial. And bicolor lights are also great for times when you have a daylight balanced lighting setup, but you want to warm up the talent skin tones a little bit. Just be careful not to go too far. Let's take a look at how the 1x1 kits can be used in some common shooting scenarios. Without a doubt, the most common use is for shooting interviews and other types of headshots. There isn't hardly a documentary, corporate video, or news story that doesn't include these types of shots. In a typical interview setup with classic 3-point lighting, you'll want to use the first 1x1 as the key light, the second 1x1 as your fill light, and the third 1x1 as your backlight. However, if you've got the Duo kit, then you won't have a third light, and so you'll have to decide on a case-by-case basis how to use your 2 1x1s for maximum effectiveness. We'll talk more about that topic in a minute, but for now, let's assume that we have 3 lights to work with. Now, as I said earlier, the first step should always be to choose your location wisely. I suggest looking for locations where you have an interesting looking background that already has some nice light on it, and then you can use the 3 lights from your kit to make the talent look great. Almost without exception, the key light should be placed on the same side of the camera as where the interviewer will be seated. The order should be camera, interviewer, key light. If your kit includes both spots and floods, I recommend choosing a 1x1 spot for use as the key because it offers more control over spill than a flood. Good lighting isn't just about illuminating the subject, it's also about controlling spill on the background and other places where you do not want the light shining. You'll probably find that placing the key light about 4 to 6 feet from the subject at a 30 to 45 degree off-axis angle from the camera and raised so that it's about a foot or 2 higher than the head of the subject is a good place to start. Now, no 2 setups are exactly the same, so the final positioning will vary from shot to shot, but this starting point will get you in the ballpark. Sometimes you may want to add some diffusion to the front of the 1x1 to create an even softer light on the talent's face. Litepanels offers an accessory gel filter kit that includes several types of diffusion materials, plus CTO gels that can convert your daylight balance lights to tungsten when necessary. You simply slide one of the laminated sheets into the convenient built-in slot, and instantly you've got a softer light. Another option is to tape some diffusion material over the front of the light. Both Roscoe and Lee offer inexpensive diffusion filter packs that contain an assortment of pre-cut sheets of various types of materials. During this part of the setup process, you should have the light powered all the way up to 100% so you can see everything it's got. You can always dim it down later if it turns out that you don't really need the light's full power. But for those times when even full power doesn't seem to be enough, then you'll need to move the light closer to the subject. In fact, cutting the distance in half between the light and the subject will make it appear 4 times brighter. So even moving the light a little bit can make a big difference. However, the point of the key light is not to see how much light you can blast onto the subject. The key light has 2 purposes. First, to ensure that the camera has enough light to get the correct exposure, and second, to make the talent look good. If you add too much light, it can become counterproductive. Now it's time to bring in the fill light. The primary purpose of the fill light is to control the contrast ratio between the light and dark sides of the face. In general, flat lighting, where both sides of the face are lit evenly, should not be your goal. But an exception to that rule is if the talent will be speaking directly to the camera. In that instance, often it does look better if the key light and fill lights have nearly equal intensity. With classic 3-point lighting, the fill light should be positioned on the opposite side of the camera from the key light and at about the same height as the key light. But once again, there are no strict rules to follow and the final position will vary from setup to setup. Using the dimmer, you can adjust the intensity to get the look that you want. Sometimes you may want a dramatic, high contrast look, but more often, a softer look with subtle shadowing looks better. Now with the key and fill lights in position, it's time to think about what we're going to do with the third 1x1 in the light kit. Generally, you want to use it as a backlight, but in some situations, a backlight may not be desired, and that frees up the light to be used for the background instead. We'll talk about that in a minute. When I'm using a 1x1 as a backlight, I place it on the same side as the fill light and carefully position so that it's just barely outside of the frame. You can use the 1x1's dimmer to get the intensity just the way you want it, and that's one of the best things about using LED lights. The point of the backlight is just to separate the talent from the background and give your 2D image more of a 3D feel. Usually a subtle backlight is more effective than an overly strong one, so don't get carried away and overdo it. So that's a pretty basic 3-point lighting setup with the 1x1 kits that would work well with many different shooting scenarios and locations that you're apt to encounter. But let's take a couple more minutes and look at some other examples of the 1x1 kits in action. Now, as I said earlier, if you've got a 1x1 duo kit and therefore only 2 lights to work with, you'll have to decide the best way to use those 2 lights on a case-by-case basis. It's a given that one light is going to be your key, so it's really the second light that offers you choices. For example, in this situation, there was enough ambient light in the room that no fill was even needed, and light number 2 could then be used as a backlight. And in this setup, I didn't need a backlight to get the look I wanted, so light number 2 could be used as a fill. 1x1s are ideal for fast-moving news production, and quite often 2 lights are all that's needed. Here's a typical looking stand-up with 2 battery-operated 1x1s that was set up in about 5 minutes. And when you're done with the shot, don't forget that you're not going to have to waste valuable time waiting for the lights to cool down before you can pack them up. 1x1s can also make excellent, very powerful fill lights on faces during daytime. In this example, the room was relatively dark without very much ambient light, and I wanted more light on the background than that. So 2 1x1s are being used on the talent, and a third 1x1 is being used to add a little light to the background. In this example, 2 1x1s are being used for a shot with slow motion. Notice that there's none of the flickering you get at high frame rates with many other brands of lights. And finally, I like to use 1x1s whenever I just need to bring up the ambient level of light in a room without making it look like it's being lit. I just aim 1 or 2 of the lights up at the ceiling and let them fill the room with diffused light. And I never have to worry about setting off sprinklers or singeing the paint like I would if I was using tungsten lights.